I stood in the middle of a dark, damp room, feeling as if I had already been sentenced to death. The light from the lantern wavered in my hands, casting strange shadows on the walls, from which only the remains of paint were visible. I had no right to be here, and if someone found out that I still got into this abandoned building, no one would have found me a long time ago. It was late October, and I was a senior detective with the New York Police Department. Some people thought that I should have retired a long time ago, but you know how it is. When you are a police officer, you can never leave the job for good, especially when you are haunted by an old, unsolved crime. I found this building through an old record in a case that was never closed. All the evidence pointed to this place being an important piece of the puzzle I had been trying to piece together for years. Colleagues have long since dismissed this case, but I could not leave it. Something was bothering me. As I moved deeper inside, the floor creaked under my feet, as if to warn me that I was going in the wrong place. However, I kept moving forward until I was in front of a door at the end of a long corridor. It was slightly ajar, and a weak light was shining from under it. My heart beat faster as I got closer to her. What did I expect to see there? Another old record? Perhaps the remnants of once neglected things? But what I found was far worse. I carefully opened the door. The lantern illuminated the face of a man sitting on a chair in the middle of the room. He was dead, no doubt about it. But his eyes, they were wide open, and he seemed to be looking straight at me. His hands were tied behind his back, and a grimace of horror froze on his face. It was a recently missing informant who was working undercover for me. What was he doing here, and who killed him? But these were not the only questions that began to scroll through my head. I realized that now I myself was in danger. A chill ran down my spine as I heard soft footsteps behind me. I turned sharply, prepared for the worst. In the light of the lantern, I saw a dark figure that stopped just a few steps away from me. My fingers instinctively tightened around the handle of the gun, but before I could raise the weapon, the figure spoke. "Don't shoot, detective!" A deep voice echoed through the silence, as if cutting it to pieces. "You've come too far to just leave here." I did not know this voice, but I felt that it knew me. My suspicion was confirmed when the figure came into the light, and I recognized the face I had seen in the cases I had been studying for several years in a row. It was Michael Harrison, a former police officer who was suspected of collaborating with organized crime, but he was never officially brought to justice. All witnesses either disappeared or died before the trial. "What are you doing here, Harrison?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level even though everything inside was clenching with tension. He smiled, but this smile was far from friendly. "That which should have been done a long time ago," he answered, stepping back a little as if inviting me to step inside the room. I stayed still, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. Every instinct screamed at me about danger, but I knew I couldn't just walk away. This was my chance to finish what I started years ago. And it was a chance to survive. "Why did you kill him?" I nodded at the body of the informant. "He was not a threat to you." "He knew too much," Harrison replied calmly, looking around as if searching for something. "And you also know more than you should." He suddenly stopped and looked directly at me. "But there is another person who knows even more, and you are already very close to her, detective, more than you can imagine." At that moment, the sound of footsteps came from behind him. Someone else was here. And now I understand that it is a trap. I needed to get out of here as soon as possible, but every move I made could be my last. Harrison took a step forward and I stepped back, almost stepping on his body. He did not allow me to continue my retreat. "If you leave now," he whispered, "you'll never know the truth." And I did something I didn't expect myself to do. I stopped and said, Harrison gave me an appraising look, as if to see if I was really ready to hear what he had to say. The silence in the room was unbearable. My nerves were on edge, and I could feel the sweat standing out on my forehead. I still kept my hand on the pistol grip, even though I knew it wouldn't help if things went wrong. "You do understand that everything you have learned up to this point was only the tip of the iceberg," Harrison began, speaking almost in a whisper, as if he was afraid someone else might overhear. I didn't answer, just stared at him, waiting for him to continue. "The body you found," he nodded at the informant's dead body, is not just a victim. He was part of a bigger game, a game that started long before you came to the department, and even long before I became a police officer. I tried to connect these words with what I knew, but they seemed so vague that it made me even more wary. "What kind of game?" I asked, though I already felt inside that the answer would be even more disturbing than anything I had heard so far. Harrison leaned forward, his face now very close to mine, and he whispered, "This is a game in which we are all pawns, and those who run this game will stop at nothing to protect their interests. It was no accident that my path and yours crossed, Detective. You got too close to them. You're threatening their secret, and now they won't stop until they get rid of you." I felt a cold fear grip my stomach. It was no longer a simple matter that I could solve by applying my skills. That was the end, an open final for anyone who dares to cross the line. "Who are they?" I asked quietly. Harrison smiled the same cold smile. "Those who are always in the shadows, Detective. They have no names, only power, and they know more about you than you think." Suddenly, the door behind me creaked, and I turned to see another figure enter the room. It was a young woman with dark hair and a stern look. She had the confident look of someone who has long since given up fear. "It's her," Harrison said, looking directly at her. "She knows the truth, and now it's your turn to decide if you're ready to hear it." The woman came closer, and I felt something in the atmosphere change. She looked at me like she was trying to gauge whether I was worth her time. "My name is Sarah," she said without looking away, "and if you really want to know the truth, you'll have to come with me." I couldn't wait any longer. I was drawn into a game from which there was no way out, and the only thing I could do was move forward. "Okay," I said, feeling the words echo in the empty room. "I'm ready." Sarah nodded and left the room without another word, and I followed her, leaving behind the dead body and Harrison, who had sunk back into the shadows. My adventure was just beginning. We walked down a long, dark corridor where every step echoed menacingly, as if the walls were watching us. I tried to collect my thoughts, but each new detail only complicated the picture. Sarah was silent, without looking back or explaining where we were going. I could only follow her, although every instinct told me that a trap might lie ahead. Finally, we stopped in front of a narrow staircase that led down into even deeper basements of this building. The dampness felt stronger and stronger. The air became heavier, as if it was pulling us into some invisible trap. "There's no going back from here," Sarah said, looking at me with a heavy look. "If you go further, you will become a part of what has remained hidden for many years, and no one can protect you anymore." I thought for a moment. If I went back, there might still be a chance to save myself, but that would be the end of everything I tried to understand and reveal during my career. On the other hand, moving forward could kill me, but I couldn't leave everything at this stage. "I'm going," I said, and we started down. The stairs led to a cold, dimly lit basement that never seemed to see the light of day. The smell of dampness mingled with the feeling of dread that gradually gripped me. We passed an old door with rusty locks and stopped in front of the only door that looked well maintained. Sarah stopped in front of them, took a deep breath, and knocked. The door quietly opened, and a tall, middle-aged man with gray hair on his temples appeared in front of us. He was dressed in an expensive suit, but his gaze was cold and menacing. This man needed no introduction. I had already seen his photo in several secret materials. It was Richard Collins, one of the most powerful people in New York, a man who always remained in the shadows, but who controlled everything that happened in the city. "Greetings, Detective," he said in a calm voice that immediately made me feel uncertain. "I was waiting for this meeting." I didn't answer, just frowned as I watched him. My fingers instinctively tightened around the gun, even though I knew he would be powerless here. "Come in," he said, stepping back and gesturing for us to enter. I glanced at Sarah, who gave a faint nod, and we entered the study, where the space was filled with old books, paintings, and antique furniture. This contrast with the dark basement was stunning. Richard Collins sat down at a huge table and motioned for us to sit down. "You must want to know why you are here," he said, setting aside the documents he had been studying. But before I begin, let me ask you one thing. How far are you willing to go to find out the truth? To the end, I answered firmly, without hesitation. He smiled, but this smile was filled with some bitter disappointment. I thought so. But unfortunately, the truth is something that can break even the strongest. Richard leaned forward and began to say things that made me question everything I knew about this world, about justice, and about my job. He talked about the secret organizations that ran the city, about the corruption that spread to all levels of government, and about the people who fell victim to this system without leaving even a trace behind. Your informant, he continued, was just a small cog in a big machine. He knew his time was coming, so he tried to escape, but you know what happened next. I felt something in my stomach turn. Everything I heard was so terrifying and real that I wanted to deny it, walk out of that office and never come back. But I knew that this would not happen again. Now, said Collins, leaning even closer, make up your own mind. Are you willing to be a part of this game, or would you rather forget everything you've heard today and try to save your life? I didn't know what to answer. My hands were shaking, and my brain was paralyzed with fear and incomprehension. I'd already come too far, but I sat in silence trying to gather my thoughts. Richard Collins' proposal was stunning. On the one hand, I was a detective who dedicated his life to fighting crime and justice. On the other hand, I just realized that this justice, for which I fought so hard, was only an illusion, behind which even darker and more sinister forces hid. Collins was staring at me, waiting for an answer, while Sarah, who had brought me here, stood behind her, seemingly ready for any development. She knew what my decision would mean for all of us. What will happen if I refuse? I finally asked, still hesitating. Richard Collins sighed and leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest. If you refuse, he began, his voice calm and cold, your life will be short. Too many people already know that you have learned too much. They won't let you get out of here alive. My heart beat faster. I understood that this was not just a threat. The people behind Collins had enough power to destroy me, and not only me, but also everyone who could stand in their way. But if you agree, he continued, leaning forward and looking intently into my eyes, I promise you'll have access to resources and knowledge you never imagined possible. You will be able to do things that you never could before, not limited by laws that, as you already know, do not always serve justice. It was a temptation, a great, heavy temptation. I could become part of something bigger, control something that had always seemed out of reach, but at the same time I understood that the price would be my soul. And how does it work? I asked, feeling like I had already made my choice, though there was still a deep sense of doubt inside me. Collins smiled. It was the smile of a man who knew he had won. All you have to do, he said, is follow Sarah. She will show you everything. You will get a new life, a new identity, and most importantly, protection from those who might threaten you. We will work together as part of one team. He paused for a moment to give me time to grasp the full implications of his proposal. But remember, detective, he continued, there will be no going back. If you agree, you can never go back to your old life. I looked at Sarah. She seemed to be waiting for this moment. Her eyes met mine, and I saw something familiar in them. Perhaps it was the same doubt I felt. What will happen next? I asked quietly. Then you will come with me, she answered calmly, but there was a certain tone of urgency in her voice. We will get out of here, and I will show you something that will change your life forever. Collins nodded, and I knew it was settled. Okay, I said, slowly getting up from my chair. I agree. These words seemed to hang in the air. I made a choice that was now inevitable. Sarah came to the door and gestured for me to leave the office. I looked back at Richard Collins, who was now watching us with calm confidence. You're one of us now, detective, he said in parting. I followed Sarah in silence, leaving the office and leaving behind all my doubts and fears. Now I was part of this game and there was no way out. The corridors seemed endless, but Sarah walked confidently, as if she knew every turn. We walked up a few floors, took the elevator up to the roof of the building, where the wind seemed to cut through everything around us. In the distance flickered the lights of a city I once thought I knew perfectly well. Sarah stopped at the edge of the roof and turned to me. "Before we go any further," she said, "there's one thing you should know. I was waiting. From now on, your life is just a tool. You can use it to change this world, or you can die fighting for that change. You chose your side. Now the main thing is not to let them break you." Her words were heavy and meaningful. I realized that I am now in a world where there is no room for weakness. "I'm ready," I said, though I still felt a shadow of fear inside. "Then let's go," she said. And we walked on into the night, where a future I could not yet imagine awaited us. New York at night stretched out before us like an endless sea of lights flickering in the darkness. From the roof of the building, everything seemed so far away, almost unreal. I could feel the wind hitting my face as if trying to release the tension, but nothing was helping. My heart was still pounding with the premonition that something inevitable was about to happen. Sarah led me across the roof to the metal stairs that led down to the black entrance. Her movements were confident and her eyes focused, as if she had done this 1,000 times before. I tried to keep up, although thousands of questions were running through my head. When we descended a few floors and exited through an inconspicuous door, I found myself in a narrow alleyway lit only by a meager number of street lamps. Sarah stepped forward quickly without looking back, and I followed her. "Where are we going?" I finally asked as we turned the corner. "We will meet with a person who will answer your questions," she said without slowing down. "A person who, like you, once made a choice and now lives with its consequences." We walked for a few more minutes, and I noticed that the streets were becoming more isolated, with buildings that looked abandoned. The feeling of anxiety only grew. We finally stopped at an old warehouse that looked like it had been abandoned for decades. All the windows were boarded up, and old rusty locks hung on the doors, which had clearly not been used for a long time. "Is it here?" I asked, doubting that we could find anything important in such a place. Sarah nodded and, taking out a small key, opened one of the locks on the door. Then she pushed the door open with a light movement of her hand, and it creaked open, revealing an entrance into the darkness. "Come in," she said, motioning for me to go first. I felt my heart begin to beat even harder, but I gathered my will into a fist and stepped into the dark space. It was dark inside. Only a few weak lamps hung from the ceiling, barely illuminating the huge room. It seemed like something huge was being stored here, but all I could make out were shadows. "Did you bring him?" came a voice from the depths of the warehouse, cold and deep as the night around us. "Yes," replied Sarah, following me in and closing the door. "He is ready." A tall figure emerged from the darkness, illuminated by dim lamps. He was a middle-aged man with piercing eyes that seemed black in the light falling on him. His face was lined with wrinkles that showed years spent in constant danger. "I'm Jonathan Blake," he introduced himself, his voice echoing through the vast room. "You must have heard of me if Sarah brought you here." I nodded. The name was familiar. I had seen it in police department archives, but it had always been shrouded in mystery. Known in narrow circles as an agent who once investigated the most dangerous cases, Blake disappeared from the radar several years ago. And now I understood why. "I'm glad you decided to join," he continued, giving me an appraising look. "But you must understand that there is no way back. You will enter a world where there are no rules, only survival." "I know," I answered, although I felt that I still did not fully understand what I had signed up for. Blake nodded and gestured us to sit on the old wooden boxes that stood in the center of the room. "We call this place Ground Zero," he began as we all sat down. "This is the place where everything begins and ends. No outsider will ever get here. Here we plan our actions. Here we store information that cannot be trusted to anyone. And here we make decisions that affect this world." He paused, as if giving me time to take in what he had said. "But why me?" I asked, still not understanding why I had been brought here. "Because you're someone who doesn't back down from the truth," Blake replied. "You have what it takes to survive this game, and now you have to choose whether you are ready to play by our rules." He leaned forward and looked me straight in the eye again. "We are not fighting for money or power. We fight to reveal the truth and destroy those who manipulate this world. But this will be a war, and there is no room for weakness in it. I felt a cold sweat covering my forehead. It was more than I could have imagined, but at the same time I understood that I had no other choice. I was already involved in this conflict, and now all I had to do was move forward. "I'm ready," I said, more for myself than for them. Sarah and Blake exchanged glances, and I could see something akin to approval on their faces. "Then we'll begin," Blake said. "Today you will learn everything you need to know to survive and win, but remember, from now on, you have to be ready for anything. The stakes in this game are very high." With these words, he got up and gestured for me to follow him. My journey was just beginning, and I could no longer retreat. I stood up from the old crate, feeling the weight of what I had just heard settle on my shoulders. Blake strode forward, his footsteps echoing in the large, empty warehouse. Sarah walked beside me, silently supporting my decision, even though I knew that even if I wanted to turn back, it wouldn't be possible. We stopped in front of a massive metal door. Blake placed the card on the reader, and the door slowly opened to reveal a small room where everything looked too modern for the place. Inside, there was a table with computers, and on the walls hung maps, photographs, and graphics crossed by red lines, indicating various points and persons. Blake closed the door behind us and sat down at one of the computers. "This is the heart of our operation," he said, gesturing me to come closer. "Here we collect information, analyze it, and make decisions. We have access to sources you didn't even know existed." A map of New York appeared on the screen, covered with dozens of labels located in various parts of the city, mostly in places that were considered dangerous or abandoned. "These are influence points," Blake explained. "There are people here who work for the shadow forces we talked about earlier. They run operations that support corruption, organized crime, and conspiracy at the highest levels. Our task is to find a way to expose them and destroy this system." I stared at the screen, trying to grasp the magnitude of what we were facing. They controlled everything from street crime to large financial operations. "What exactly are we going to do?" I asked, feeling the tension rise inside. Blake looked at me intently. His next words were heavy but clear. "First, we have to gather more information. Each of these labels is a link in the chain that leads to the top. We must break this chain, one link at a time, until we reach those who control it all. I realize that now my choice is final. From now on, I will be a part of this game, a game where there are no rules, only survival. And if I make even one wrong move, it could be my last." I knew there was no going back. Now it remains only to go forward, together with people who believe that they can change this world. And maybe in this game, I will be able to find not only the answers to my questions, but also the truth that I have been looking for all my life.